King. Did I say it right? Yes, nailed it. To give a more formal intro to Karyn.
How close do you have to, is it this close? Okay, cool. Good evening, and thank you for joining us here tonight for the Visual Studies Visiting Artist Lecture Series. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Karyn Olivier, an incredibly strong artist whose understanding of creativity as a necessity of everyday existence is nothing short of inspiring. Whether confronting the viewer with a monumental seesaw or a carousel for one, Olivier's objects and installations invite not only a physical and sensory experience, but also a psychological, emotional, and social response. Though her work generates quite public experiences, there is a feeling of subtle, more simple gestures that allow for a sense of intimacy coupled with tension. Through sculpture and installation, Olivier's work reminds us that art can and should be a delicate dance between poetics and politics. Olivier lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and is currently an associate professor of sculpture at Tyler School of Art. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including exhibitions at the Gwangju and Busan Biennials, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, the Mattress Factory, and SculptureCenter. In 2015, Olivier created public works for Creative Time in Central Park and New York City's Percent for Art program. She is the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Award, the New York Foundation for the Arts Award, a Pollock-Krasner Foundation grant, the William H. Johnson Prize, the Louis Comfort Tiffany.
I don't make money on my art.
The Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Biennial Award, a Creative Capital Foundation grant, and a Harpo Foundation grant. Her work has been reviewed in the New York Times, Time Out New York, The Village Voice, Art in America, Flash Art, Mousse, The Washington Post, NKA, Journal of Contemporary African Art, and Frieze, among others. Please join me in welcoming Karyn Olivier.
Whoa. Wow, I have to do this. Oh my God, he's a very famous artist. So then finally at 30, I decided to stop doing all the, just maybe take this more seriously. So I decided to move to Philadelphia because at the time I was doing ceramics and New York didn't care about crafts, and now everyone loves clay. Everyone loves it now, you know, it's now. But so at the time it just made sense to go to Philadelphia for 2 years to take classes enough to apply to grad school. So I applied for school at Cranbrook. But once I got to Cranbrook, I kind of did one thing in clay, and then that was over. So that's like a recap of everything. Okay, this is bright. Okay, I'll get used to it. So in my work, I'm usually looking at our social interactions with objects, spaces, and each other. And I'm often exploring notions of domesticity and nostalgia. And I'm thinking nostalgia functions in the work kind of through historical references, be it memory-based or like imagined. So I kind of deal with sometimes just actual childhood memories. This is a piece, it's called Winter Hung to Dry. And I was thinking about my childhood memory of spending my summers in Trinidad, and somehow I did laundry, I would say pretty much every day with my grandmother, and we'd hang the clothes in line, she'd tell stories. And then between our apartment buildings in Brooklyn, back in the day, you'd have clothes. So I was thinking about that, like my history of that. So I decided at the soap factory just to pile all of my winter clothes in the middle of the line, this line, I think it's about 80 feet long. And I wanted it to kind of read as this like weighty weightlessness and I wanted it to be somewhat melancholy. It's like a surrogate for the body, but I also wanted it to be like really absurd. It's like a former soap factory. Winter clothes would not be the clothes that's on a line because it would be frozen. So I was hoping there'd be some humor with the kind of heaviness of the piece. This is a piece I did in the Greater New York show in 2005. And it's one of those things where I had the studio visit. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to maybe be in the Greater New York show. And I'm showing them all my new work, and they're like, we want this piece. And I'm like, but that's my grad school. Like, what about all these new pieces? They're like, no, we want that. But I ended up working on the space. And I was thinking, I was interested in doing like these architectural interventions, and I was thinking about them as maybe object adjustments or space rearrangements. And this goes back to Trinidad again. Like, I was thinking about my grandparents' coffee table, and it kind of really functioned. Like, we'd sit around it. You know, we didn't really watch TV, because back then, I mean, now it's totally different because there's cable everywhere. But there were only 2 channels. So there's a channel, there's all Trinidadian shows that were all political. And then it would be like old American sitcoms from literally like 3 years ago. And they were so old. So we kind of just hung out, and we like danced and sang. And I mean, it really functions. I was thinking about like, what does it mean today that coffee tables don't function that way? You know, it's a place to put your food while you binge watch. And that's what I do too. But it's like, I was kind of thinking about what has happened that we kind of don't have time for that activity. Like, we put coffee table books, but it's almost like decoration. You know, it's, they're not there to really be engaged with. So I was thinking, well, how can I activate it? So I decided to like literally make it part of the room. And so I built this faux column, and it goes flush to the ceiling. And it's definitely a nod to surrealism, of course. But it was interesting that people really believed the fiction at the opening. I wasn't there, thank goodness, because I built this thing in my studio. I didn't realize the stairway couldn't get down, so I had to cut it in half and then re-put together. It was a nightmare. So some guy like leaned on it, just like, whoop, split from the top. And he's like arguing with my mother. He's like, no, it was cracked before. And she's like, no, that's my daughter's piece. It's fake. It's foam. But I kind of like that it's kind of like this thing that you kind of believe this fiction. I was invited to do this show. There was an exchange between these galleries in Europe with Bushwick about two falls ago, right now. And this one gallery in Switzerland, I had done a project with them in Mexico City. They collaborated with this other gallery in Bushwick, and they asked 4 artists to kind of participate. And they wanted to do a thing with the idea was like exchange rate, so they decided maybe they could push that idea further. So they asked the 4 artists to create installations in 4 homes of people who live in the neighborhood. So I was thinking about, you know, public and private space, and like the living room, like is like the most public of your private space. And maybe you have things that there on display that you wouldn't mind, like the plumber coming through, but maybe there might be something, there are things that you maybe put in your bedroom that would be hidden, or if those things were exposed. I was thinking about like how it could kind of shift that public and private space and how we kind of interact in that. So I was thinking about that, but then I decided I was thinking about that living room thing, and I decided maybe I could just engage that. So I decided to take photographs of these basically strangers. I didn't know them. I was kind of like, hi, I'm going to do a piece. And I decided, the idea was that you make an installation in their home, and then whatever you had to displace of their domestic objects would go in the gallery. So I decided I just wanted to like take photographs of their living room. So I just did photographs of the whole living room, and I just kind of pinned up these long, like almost like temporary photographs up. And then I just placed all the objects that were there in the place. So I was thinking about this like confounding these like 2 typically distinct and disparate spaces, the idea of the gallery and the home. And it was kind of the art was displaced, but it also, I liked there was a vulnerability between someone's coming to the gallery. In order to go see the art, they have to kind of call the person and see if they're home to go see it. Or the idea that one of the people who lived in that house, she was an artist too, and she kind of felt uncomfortable about putting her art on display. But I kind of liked there was a vulnerability on both ends of it. And in the end, I kind of was realizing I was more interested in giving an experience to the owners. I was thinking about that once they have like access and they don't have access to their things, or like the idea that the things you surround yourself with, the objects, they're all imbued with meaning, but there's also a burden to objects. So the idea that you have that pile of books, all of a sudden you don't have to feel guilty about those books, because now it's just a simulacrum of them. Or like you don't have to think about the dusting that you should be doing, because it's just like you only have to deal with it on this surface level. And the show was only supposed to be up for four days, and I think they kept it up for a couple of weeks. They're like, we just love not having the burden of these things that we love. But I like the idea that this is a piece that I think maybe 100 people saw it. I kind of like that. I always think about my artwork, like the idea that having different publics for your work. So I kind of like that this was like, maybe you went to the gallery and you tried to call and the person was at work and you couldn't see the work, but I think it's okay for work to exist in that way. Here's some other shots. The cat was freaking out. He kept on trying to jump up to the bin where he used to hang out. I felt a little bad for that. Or like I had areas where I messed up like the thing, so but I kind of like that my printing, my perspective got wonky. So this is like a source image. I was invited by the Vannes Foundation, they're in the south of Sweden, to do a project. And at the time I was researching all these Roman communal toilets. And I was thinking about, so Vannes is like this amazing sculpture park, but it's also like the largest organic farm in Europe. And I was thinking about how, up until very recently, in Sweden, there were communal outhouses. And I kept thinking, when I did my site visit, I was thinking, I spent most of my time in the cow stables. I just didn't know what to do with the art spaces. So I would go there, and it was this weird thing of like you enter the cow stable and like all the cows would just look at you. And it was this weird thing about me feeling as though I'm in their public space. I'm in their private space, but it's also public. So, and I was also then thinking about like, what does it mean about culture that now these communal spaces, which were pretty quotidian, there was kind of like every day, don't exist anymore. So like what happens that we've lost that kind of intimacy or that way of communicating? So I decided, to make this 30-seater in the gallery. And of course, it's like a nod to Donald Judd. How can it not be? But I was loving, like, with the mold and the casting, these drip stains. I kind of like that. It's like almost like you're pissing or shitting on your art heroes. And someone told me it was like perverted minimalism. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to go for there. So I did this project at the SculptureCenter in Queens. And I decided again to use the building's history. It used to be a trolley repair shop, and I titled the piece after the trolley line that ran in that neighborhood. So I decided to build this like fabricated, street with these trolley tracks, and above you could kind of see the cable lines. And it was for this piece, it was really important for it to be like this seamless insertion into the architecture. I think if it was exposed, I think the piece wouldn't have worked. So it really kind of happened that people missed it, then they recognized it, and then once they recognized it, they kind of believed the absurdity of it. They believed that this like sewer grate would be in the basement of this building. I remember at the opening, Fred Wilson, I just spent the summer with him at Skowhegan, and he's like, Karyn, where's your piece? You've been annoying me about your piece. Like literally, he's like, well, I was like, you're on it. And I love that he like totally missed it, but then once you see it, it's like, you kind of have that recognition. And I sometimes think about the specificity of work and objects or whatever your content is, kind of really leads to this universal understanding or this universality. And at the opening, I had this Holocaust survivor came to me, and she like just hugged me and was crying. And for her, it was like, thinking about, these tunnels going on the train, like the train to nowhere. And it was kind of amazing. I had another person make reference to the Underground Railroad. So I kind of liked through this like specificity of the history, it kind of allowed for people to kind of access it. This is a piece I did at the old Feldman Gallery that unfortunately doesn't exist. It would be great to be like, yeah, that's where it was. So this piece is called Bench Seating for One. And I was, so from the outside, you see this brick wall that bisects the space, which is kind of not really that interesting. But I'm hoping if you're curious, you'll walk inside and be like, what's the deal with this brick wall inside? Besides the obvious, bringing the outside in, which is fine, but not kind of, who cares in a way, minimalism, whatever. So hopefully you'll walk around and see there's a steel plate seat. This seat for one side, I'm hoping this monolithic presence would kind of recall minimalism, but I was also thinking about minimalism, but I was thinking about beyond objecthood, or like the idea about the viewer, needing the viewer to complete the piece. I was hoping to kind of take it a step further, like the piece is only functioning with your back to it. So in a way, the viewer is negating the sculpture, so the sculpture disappears and the gallery becomes the object. So the idea of subject and object are inverting. And I was thinking at the time also like this kind of this gift to artists, to the students. All damn day you're looking at damn art. Visual images, so wouldn't it be nice to like go in a space, have a seat, and see blank walls? It could be like inspiring or just like a, respite. But I was also at that time, I had just reread Baudrillard's Ecstasy of Communication, and like the idea of the notion of like public and private space and how it's kind of lost their meaning. So I was thinking about, how we treat public spaces now. It's like kind of like cell phones in public. I mean, we're kind of like an extreme of that. So I was thinking about also like giving these students like this intimate experience where they could be sitting there having this contemplative moment on one side, but knowing that someone else could be walking on the other side of the space. But also above was like a communal like lounge. So there's this kind of like this ambivalence, or this kind of being aware of this public and private and how it's kind of fluctuating constantly. So this is like actually a de-install image from my thesis show at Cranbrook. We got to have work in the whole Cranbrook Art Museum, which was like beautiful. And I actually thought my piece was done. I made another piece in my studio that I thought was going to be my thesis piece, and 3 weeks before the show, my faculty said, no, when you get out of school, no one's going to come to your installations. Like, no one's coming to your house. No one's coming. He's like, you have to do something in the gallery. And I was like, what? I'm done. I was going to chill for the next 3 weeks. But it ended up being great that I was forced to do another piece. So this space was like, I don't know, it was like maybe 2/3 of this. And it had these two shallow domes. One was like maybe 6 feet in diameter. The other was 4. And, you know, when I was standing under, of course, I was thinking, like, the acoustics were shifting a little, so I started thinking about the whispering domes and the whole thing. So I was like, maybe I could do something here. So I decided to lower the ceiling by 3 feet. So all of a sudden, those shallow domes became these, like, deep circular cavities. And again, this is one of those pieces that was seamless with the architecture. Some people kind of missed it, like, just walked by it. And I was thinking, being John Malkovich, that had come out, like, not that long before, the half room, whatever. But I think that's good. I love when people miss the work. Like, in a way, that's great, you know? So, like, okay, so maybe you do notice, okay, what's up with that wall? So it's the idea, like, how do I have to, do I want to cross the threshold? Like, is it going to be, like, worth it, that decision? So, and I was thinking about how when you see someone inside, there's something about not being able to make a judgment. You don't have access to the face. I think that's the quickest way we make judgments, and you don't have access, so you kind of have to kind of trust something's going to happen. So once you decide to enter, you kind of go from this compressed thing of bending down, and you stand up in this space that feels really kind of pretty expansive. It definitely did a James Turrelli thing, where it felt like, ooh, you know, and then, you know, if you have a curved wall, you know, have this kind of like a spatial disorientation thing can happen. So that kind of was cool. I was like, wow, I have this James Turrelli thing. But then it was really a sound piece. So then, you know, when someone else entered the space with you and you started speaking, you realized the acoustics in each of those domes was different and your voice kind of altered. And all of a sudden your voice became unfamiliar. So I like with this piece that the expectation kept shifting. I still think it's probably one of my best pieces, which sucks. I've been out of grad school since 2001. Yeah, you know, to have a piece that keep like, I think this is it. Then they're like, oh man, it's doing this other thing. But what are you gonna do? But then it was remade somewhere else at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. It totally like fell flat. They had to fake the whole thing, and it's like, But it was nice to be able to put on your resume, right? Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, right? Okay, so this was at Socrates Sculpture Park, which is an amazing park. You know, it's a sculpture park, it's a dog park, they have film screens, there's yoga, there's tons of activities. So I kept thinking, okay, what kind of other parks are there? So of course I started thinking about Coney Island growing up in Brooklyn and my childhood experience of, you know, going early in the season. I don't know if they do this anymore, but they would make you wait till every seat was full. Like you could wait 40 minutes before they move, before the ride would go. Maybe my imagination is like extending it longer, but I remember being like, okay, 3 more people need to sit. You know? So I was thinking about that, or thinking like when you're a kid and the ride ends and you don't want it to end, but they make you go back in line, you know what I mean? So I was thinking, well, if I could make a ride for myself as an adult, what would I want? Maybe a ride that's just for me, or like it doesn't end. So I decided to build this pretty stark carousel, but it's kind of to scale. So when you enter the park, it's pretty recognizable, like, oh, carousel, woo! But there's no music. I only had like little rope lighting at the bottom. You know, there's no, you know, lights and bells. There's no, you know, horses. And it's achingly slow, it moves. It takes 5 minutes to make one revolution. And to me, it was important for it to go, our carousels actually go counterclockwise, but I kind of wanted to make sure it goes forward. I felt like I just didn't want it to be too nostalgic, so I was hoping that moving forward would help with that. So the thing, so from far away, it's very familiar, and then when you get on it or close to it, becomes less so. And I was really exploring aloneness, you know, and not necessarily loneliness, though that's part of it, you know, but I was thinking, you know, these amusement parks are there to kind of bombard your senses to the point where you lose yourself, you know, and there's something about that escape, and I was thinking, well, maybe being with yourself and in that presentness, that same activity could happen with a consciousness of it. This is like at the opening. This was like one random night I went. This is the day when I went to videotape it, because I realized, oh, and I don't know where that video is, but I went to videotape it, and there was this, I call it The Saddest Man. The Saddest Man was on it, and I actually was crying. I was like, I made the saddest piece, you know? It was like heartbreaking. And then actually the director, Skohegan, went to see it, and she said she kind of had an experience just like crying on my thing. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? So that was kind of a bummer, but I was like, Karyn, just hang out, because there was an activity happening with the kids on the other end. So at some point, there were like 50 kids on this, and they were trying to push it to go faster. And I'm like, don't break it, because me and Mark DeSuvo kept having to repair it. And then all of a sudden, I wish I had a picture. Like the kids left, and it was like two moms with like little babies. And so it kind of went through all the kind of possibilities, it felt like, of what this piece could be. So it was really lovely, like the sun was setting and these two moms with it. It was just like, I was like, okay, it's okay, I didn't make the worst piece. But it's like, so I have all this stuff in hindsight about the piece, but at the time, you know, I realized it was just a breakup piece. Like, what did I do wrong? I'm going in circles. So I did seriously, I was like, oh my God. So I just did a series of playground pieces. So in the back, it's after a tetherball. So instead of like one bright yellow ball, it's 130 that are covered with clay powder and pigment. So I like that from a distance. They really read as concrete, really static, which is really kind of like static and ground, which is totally like antithetical to kind of what the game is. I always think about it as this kind of, it's one of those things, I've never played the game, but I have such a nostalgia for it. Like I think about it as this like dance with like, you know, sky and movement. So then when you get closer, you realize it's just powder, and it's really quite ephemeral. If like you touch it, it's like this big mass moves, which is so counter to how it normally moves, and it's just like such a flow. So I kind of like that switch from being something that's totally permanent, and that whole thing. I was thinking about modernist architecture and the failure of that. So I think it was tied. It's not in it, but I think I was thinking about all those things, even if it doesn't kind of come through. And then I got asked to do a Percent for Art commission in New York and Long Island City. They built this whole new apartment and schools along the water, not far from PS1. And they were like, Karyn, we're so psyched. You did all this playground work. We want you to like to do something with the playground. So I came up with all these great like alternative playground equipment that's still art. And they kept shotting each one down. I was like, but you wanted play. Like you're telling me. I was like, how safe? I said, kids, it's all about kids kind of figuring things out. They can, I'm not making something dangerous, but just let it happen. So in the end, I was like, fine, I'll make a monument to a tetherball. They're like, we love it. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I made a 30-foot tall one. I mean, but so at first I was like, are they kidding me? But then I kind of got into it. I was thinking, you know, maybe this absurd scale will kind of allow for different like entry points, like humor, this kind of childlike wonder, or like reverence. So I was thinking about maybe the scale could kind of elicit kind of like humility, but also the ridiculousness of it. I was thinking the piece could maybe act as like a flagpole, kind of like the reminder that playgrounds are these kind of victorious places. You know, but I was also thinking it was important for it to illustrate movement, because I wanted to do this thing where it would move, and they said, no, da-da. So I decided I just kind of watched a game and kind of did a drawing, and then that was kind of like the marking and like the territory, and kind of like a ghost of what the image would be, of what the game would be. And then one day I just went and photographed, and all these kids were playing. And I was like, oh, yeah. And that was a key thing for me, too. I was like, I didn't want it to be separate. I was like, it has to be in the playground, play area for it to make sense. It wouldn't make sense just to be like a plop sculpture somewhere. And then I love it. I love the melancholy. Oh. And then a friend of mine, my oldest assistant's like, oh, my God, I went to buy your piece, and, oh, it's not showing up now. This keeps happening. The video, oh, there it is. Oh, and she's like, Karyn, I was at my friend's house and I saw your piece. And my friend and I were playing with it, but I don't know how to press play. Where's my mouse? How do you press play? You want to help? Yeah, I don't know how to.
It's down. We can, where is your mouse?
Oh, it's not just me. Okay, good.
No, it's not just you.
So it's that, you know, the app with the slow-mo? I was like, oh, how good is this? And it had to be just high enough. How great is that? Right? I looked at the basketball, I was like, whoa, how cool is that? That's like the best documentation ever. But they said it had to be high enough, like I actually had to make sure it was like high enough, so I think it was 9 feet off the ground. So it's like, it actually works, see? So this is actually a photograph I found of this playground, actually in a church the church school's playground in Nigeria, and I just love that monkey bar. So I decided to make it out of, like, to scale, out of poplar. And I was thinking, this thing that used to be stable and, like, give support no longer does. And I was thinking about childhood and the fragility of that, and, like, there's an innocence there. But I was also thinking there's always this resilience. And I was thinking about my mom. She tells a story of, like, falling off a monkey bar in Trinidad. Her 2 front teeth got stuck in the tar because it was, like, hot. So it's like the tar was, like, kind of crazy, right? I keep wanting to make a piece about that, and I was like, this was mine. But I was also thinking about Martin Perrier, who I had a love affair with, but now I feel like I'm not as into him. But I was in love with Martin Perrier and his works. I wanted to kind of make this beautiful object. But I was also thinking about, like, portable childhood. You could kind of just fold it and, like, take it with you. So I was thinking, like, playgrounds, nostalgia and all that, but I think that their playgrounds are like this really psychologically like charged spaces. It's kind of like one of the earliest arenas where one learns to define power, privilege, collaboration, respect, and I think the politically charged spaces where kids first are recognizing, like, physical strength, gender, race, class, all that stuff kind of gets played out in the playground. So in this case, instead of like a 10-foot, they're usually 10 feet long, this one's 40 feet. And so it's about childhood memories, but it's also about, balance and, like, kind of like how do we achieve it in, like, our complex lives. And I was thinking about distance and intimacy and how they can happen at the same time. And at this point, I had finished the core program, and I was teaching full time at University of Houston, but then I was doing a residency in New York, so I was, like, flying, like, every week I was flying between these 2 places, so always feeling like I was in the wrong place. I did that for about 2 years. And there's also, like, this idea of, like, tension and vulnerability, and how do you kind of, and I was thinking about, like, now that you have this thing, and, like, how do you navigate this new, like, it's familiar, but how do you navigate this thing? And I didn't expect this to happen, and it was in the gallery, like, you're writing on it, and it felt all of a sudden really elegant and, like, graceful. There was a kind of, like, this quiet of the air, and it was a strange, surreal thing because it was, like, devoid of, like, the raucous cries and, like, the screaming that kids have. So this thing that but it's a completely different experience. I just thought it was going to be funny, but I wasn't expecting this kind of, like, grace and beauty to come out of this piece. So this piece was actually also in the show. All these things, the Tetherball, the original one, the monkey bar, was in the show. But I had this little photograph I took in this neighborhood in Houston, and I love it. It looks like it's identical houses, but they're really a mirror of each other. And I was thinking that it looks like it could almost, there's a vulnerability to the houses, but they're also like formidable and fragile. They kind of seem, they're kind of tethered between the two. And also I'm a twin, so I realized I do all this twin work. But then also it's like, go to Meta Clark. Damn, right? Splitting? Yeah. So I continued, like, after that photo, every once in a while I'm kind of trying to do these, exploring photography, but it's like I never know what I'm doing, but, I always just say, well, I didn't study art, so that's my excuse. Why I don't know what I'm doing half the time. But I was thinking about this series titled, I started this series titled Double Vision. So I was trying to kind of compress these disparate things, but disparate but familiar images, and I was hoping, like, potentially to invert their meaning or to kind of create a sleight of eye or like a opening into something else. And then I started thinking about Rooney's work. I started thinking about my work now differently because of yours with her. I feel like there's a similarity there, and I had never kind of thought about it different. Whatever, I'm excited, that's all. So I'm hoping to kind of, this conflation kind of suggesting some sort of visual chord that's not necessarily there. So this piece is called Favelas in 2x4. It's a photograph I took in Rio. And there's something about that 2x4. I was thinking about, I feel like it's kind of almost aggressive or violent or brutal, like kind of like the idea of this is like a building material, but it's kind of piercing through this landscape. It's also continuing the landscape. This is the cemetery wall overlooking my grandfather's grave, and in this center is a slice from this photograph I took of this man walking in front of the Wonder Wheel, the Ferris wheel, Coney Island. And I think I was thinking about equating death, a death with, like, the experience of amusement park, or something about the ecstatic and the sublime kind of existing in both, as I imagine. But I was thinking how this piece I've shown this recently, and it's definitely taken on a different meaning. Now that everyone is thinking about Black Lives Matter, like the idea of this black man who's kind of below, like underneath a grave. You know, I think it's taken on different meanings. I think it's interesting how work could have one meaning and a context politically, or actually how the work is shown is could completely change it. So I'm actually going to read this. It's the opening scene from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. One of the locals, an insurance salesman, posts notices all around the town saying he'll stand on the roof of the town hospital, jump off, and fly across Lake Superior to the other side. The day comes and a few people gather and see Mr. Smith with his blue silk wings on the roof. Mr. Smith jumps and the scene ends. And it made me think of this. I had this book of this like ancient man with his like homemade flying contraption. I was reading about like the first attempts at flight, and I was thinking about this. This is like called the Mousse aerial steamer. And like the first day, that kind of like went off the ground like maybe 19 inches. So I decided to base this piece on kind of this particular one. And I think I was thinking about desire and how it shares the same psychological space with futility. And my dear friend, Sigrid Sandstrom, published this book called Grey Hope, The Persistence of Melancholy. And it has a description of a sky jumper as having an empty belief that falling is a version of flight. And I was thinking about like melancholy and hope and how there's a commonality, like they both lack the concrete. So I kind of built this bike with like so many, like too many wings attached, like in a way I've rendered it mute. And I really think it's like, this is the second time I made it. Like I made it first at that other show. And then this gallery in Mexico City that I'm working with, they wanted me to remake it. And I think it works better because when I made it the first time, it's like so clean, CNC, everything is just like too perfect. Well, this one was like, I'm not remaking this piece that I hate for a show. So they had like the local welders do it, and it's really kind of messy welding with like a high design like bike. So I think it kind of worked. All of a sudden now there was like an urgency to it. So I think it's like one of the like probably the least resolved pieces I've made, but I feel like it still kind of holds kind of most of the ideas I'm still kind of wrestling with. To me, this is like the companion to the seesaw. You know, I think about life and relationships, and sometimes like it's volatile and kind of have to crash. And I was thinking how different the experience would be if like two people approached it. And I was thinking again about how playgrounds today are too safe, and how they talk about like what's that doing to the brain and psychology for kids at playgrounds. I mean, there's all these articles and studies coming out about like what is this going to mean for the future. Now you go up a slide and it's like a cage you're in. So I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking, and it's funny, this piece actually got installed in St. Louis. This was at what's that place? No, the Lawmeyer Sculpture Park. Yeah, it was on loan there, and they said at some point a football team was on this, which kind of like made me almost throw up, but but it's still there. No, it's not there. It's now like in storage. It's Artist Pension Trust people have it. But someone in Kansas might buy it. Just buy it already. I'm so sick of this piece. But people always want to use this image. I'm like, oh, not the double slide again. But I get it. It's like, and think, this was the show at the Studio Museum. Like I did the residency there. And if you imagine, all the walls were covered with lots of photographs. So I had to delete them, like Photoshop them all out. It was like cover. It's like I can't get a single shot of any of my work that doesn't have. So I was like, oh, I could just erase. Keep erasing. I still love, urban playgrounds. This is a game, Handball. I was never good at it, but it's a game I really love. And I was thinking about the Handball wall. I was thinking about it's like mammoth presence is kind of almost like this intimidating wall. Definitely, the wall's really intriguing to me in a way. It's like, I think about minimalism, but in a way, it's like never embracing the ball the way, say, a basketball hoop or a goal does. It's like the activity is one of deflection. It's entirely controlled by the player. Like it's almost like the wall seems, incidental or accidental to it, and it definitely has that relationship to minimalism. But I was hoping that the engagement, the experience happening around the wall, but it's not contained. It's not contained within it. It's all about around it. And I was thinking just about the Handball as like the kind of the most, like in a way, the most proletariat, game there is. Very democratic. I was thinking about it as almost like a new kind of monument. So I decided to I was invited to do a project at the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, I think that's what it's called. And I don't know about this piece. I'm psyched, but I don't know. So I decided to make a Handball wall to scale. And so I was thinking, okay, so I make this Handball wall and maybe allow it to be seen in a new way. Maybe like people could think of it as just like a new surface for a gallery wall? Is it a barricade? Is it demarcating territories? Is it an invitation to play in the museum? So I was thinking about all those things, and I practiced it. I tried all these different materials, and I had a material that I was going to use that I knew was going to work, and then I got to Atlanta, and they didn't have it, or it was too expensive, so I had to use another kind of material. So it kind of started cracking. It did a whole other thing I wasn't expecting, but it was probably the most laborious piece I've ever made. Like, I was physically, like, sick after it. Like, I mean, 80-pound bags. They wouldn't rent the mixer, so I'm like 80-pound bags I was mixing by hand. It was like really physically taxing, but in a way, kind of like that kind of allowed, and then I put the ball in the rafter so it kind of would have the relationship. But in the end, I realized it took on like relationship to painting. It was like this 16 by 20 foot two-sided painting. So I was thinking about Barnett Newman and texture works, and that type of thing. So I think in the end, I don't know how I feel about it, but I kind of like that all of a sudden I started thinking about painting, which is not something I really ever think about. So this is modeled after a jungle gym from the early 1900s. So, when immigrants were coming to this country in a lot of cities, they were trying to figure out what to do with all these youth. Some people were like, oh, we should make these beautiful parks so people could kind of contemplative spaces. And other folks were saying, no, we have to like build playgrounds to get the energy out. All these folks are living in these like tenement areas. We need to like have this. So, I mean, the jungle gyms were like 2 stories tall. They were insane. So again, I was thinking about playgrounds and what they are now, but I decided, okay, I'm not going to make one that can function because I kind of want to reflect the reality of the world we're in, but I decided to hand carve this out of poplar. And this is in the Whitney Museum of Art had an outpost across from Grand Central Station where this piece was. So I was thinking about it. I wanted to function as, of course, an artwork, but it's a transitional space, and I wanted this is a place that people kind of walk through this plaza, they kind of hang out there, so I wanted it to kind of be activated in that way. And I was thinking about, it definitely has a relationship to Giacometti's Palace at 4 a.m., which he describes as like this vertical, immaterial drawing in space. So during the day, it was kind of strange with the no lights. It was just relying on the daylight. It kind of had this ghost-like almost, and it almost like disappeared and really kind of played tricks with your eyes in terms of where you were. It's really hard to capture that, but it was a really strange thing. But I kind of like that dreamlikeness, so that it's kind of related to the impossibility of climbing, but dreaming of doing so. So I won a grant. I proposed to do a Billboard project in Houston near Project Row Houses, and it's a 3rd Ward, which is this predominantly black neighborhood. And Project Row Houses was amazing. I don't know if you guys know Project Row Houses. Rick Lowe, amazing. He started off, he was an artist, and he was like, why am I doing work that's kind of political, that's representing, trying to talk about the black experience, and someone said to him, well, why don't you just do something instead of making images or something? He said, what? So he got like the city to give him 16 buildings, 16 houses that he worked with other people to fix up, and half of them were for artists to do installations, and the other half were for single mothers who kind of wanted to go back to school, so you have a place to live and services for you. So it's kind of amazing. So it's like they end up having like a bike. It's one of the few areas where people walk. Like Houston is very, car-centric. And it was, it's a kind of a poor neighborhood. So I love they had like a bike station teaching people how to fix old bike, make it work. It was a lovely thing. Then Rice University got involved. So of course now it's getting gentrified and there's issues. But there's still some great things happening there. But I was thinking about that neighborhood and how, I was thinking about a lot of advertising in neighborhoods of people of color. You'll see liquor, like fast food, cigarettes. It's like things that we don't need, So I was thinking maybe I could, if I get a grant and I could just build a billboard, and then actually kind of decide what it could be. Maybe it could be just a place to celebrate ourselves. So I was hoping I could open this discourse, with the community, almost reminds we belong here despite the fact that gentrification is beginning, or maybe to call attention to fleeting moments or simple gestures or brief exchanges that happen, and kind of those are things that make up a beautiful life. And it was a crazy thing when I got the grant. I was totally excited because it's a walking area. The park was totally open, but then a couple months before the piece went up, the Super Bowl was scheduled to happen in Houston. So the city took all the homeless people that were hanging out by the Super Bowl and dumped them. dump them in the black neighborhood. So then the park became so inundated that in the end they started closing it at night. So it kind of changed the piece a bit because now you have that barrier when it used to be kind of just a different way of experiencing billboards when you're so used to them being in a car and you have that distance. So it changed the piece, but I still think it kind of works in this neighborhood. And the day I wasn't planning to use this photograph, I just was testing out a camera. And when I went, I used to talk to Al all the time. And Will, the night I was installing the billboard, I had a really hard time. It was like 4 a.m. I had some friend help me. And then it could get shady at night. And some guy comes up to me, and I was thinking, I'm not in the mood. You know, I'm just not, I'm like in tears. I can't find a way to make this damn vinyl, work. And then the guy comes up to me, he's like, Al always has that smirk on his face, like he knew him. And then he said something about Will. He's like, Will always has that sad look in his eyes. And he's like, oh, I gotta call him up. No. I was like, yes, it's actually doing what I want. And that guy, he's like, I don't come to the park. So he's like, if you use the photograph, I'm gonna look away because I can't represent. I was like, it's okay. But I kind of love that about. But my hope was like my piece would go up, and it's really cheap to print a vinyl. So I was hoping it would be like mine would be up for like, I don't know, a couple months, and then Project Row House would facilitate that people could just say, I want to use it next month. But mine ended up staying up for too many years, but finally, a couple years ago, it's been so every couple months, like something else goes up. So this is someone has a photograph of their family. So I don't even know who did this, and I think I always talk about like public art. Public art's functioning when no one's thinking about of the author. That's when it's actually maybe potentially doing something when no one cares about who made it. Someone was doing like a, sustainable food, good stuff. But this, oh my God, someone sent this to me. This whole blog thing was going on. So the Menil Museum, which is amazing, somehow, I don't know how they were able to advertise. Maybe Project Row House, they needed some cash, but they allowed the Menil to display a Luke Toyman show. So that's what you see on my billboard. So, but someone in the neighborhood anonymously put this other billboard up. Oh my God, I can't even take it. What? Tupac? What? Oh my God. Brilliant. What? I can't even get over this. And someone like, this blog stuff going on for like about a couple weeks. And this friend of mine's like, Karyn, did you do that? Like, did you make that? I was like, oh my God, yes. And it was so great that my name never came up. It was like, and the whole thing came like, who gets to own this and this is ours. It was so great. I mean, I don't even know who did that. It was, yay, art's happening. It's functioning in the world as it should, So only a couple more projects. This is good. So I applied for a creative capital grant, which you guys all should do. I mean, they're amazing. I think you might have to be out of school, but they fund your project, but they also support you. It's like they kind of give support for 5 years, and that could be like I had a show somewhere and they gave me money so I could pay for an assistant, or like they have all this like professional training. It's amazing. Apply for it. Apply. And I mean, I got $50,000 to do this project. It was kind of on top of just like support and mentors and. It was amazing. So I decided, so when I got down to Houston for the core program like a week before September 11th, which was really hard to be down there. I couldn't go back to New York, the whole time thing, but it was a weird thing to be in a place that's, like billboards they're everywhere. It's like sky and billboards. And it was a strange thing to be in a place where it felt billboards were kind of innocuous, there was just, they're there. And I think like, yes, you have lots of billboards in New York, but you kind of feel the weight of them. And I was thinking about how, like, billboards, I decided with this grant to convert, I think I did 13 billboards on this commuter freeway, and have it be a photograph of what's directly behind it. And I was hoping to engage a daily commuter on the drive to work, and it's definitely a homage to, like, Magritte's Pain, The Human Condition. And I was thinking about Felix Gonzalez Torres' billboards of the early 90s, and I remember not being an artist and not even thinking about art, and seeing them on my way to the train station. In downtown Brooklyn, and I was like, what is that? And it kind of stayed with me. So I was hoping these could kind of function that way. And I was thinking, I was hoping to kind of maybe surprise or awaken the commuters on their way to work, and at the same time kind of unclutter the landscape. This is shot at night. And I was thinking about billboards' relationship like to the past. Billboards are it's about the past and the future. Like I went there, like I need to go there. It's kind of rare that they're kind of dealing with the present moment. So I was hoping like I could kind of counter the saturation, like kind of maybe allow for like some sort of pause or a breath or or some sort of opening, and I was thinking about, public engagement, public participation. In this case, like unknowingly, the public's participating, and it doesn't have to be this physical interaction. Here's some other shots. It was kind of crazy. I thought it would be if you had to be in a certain lane, it'd line up, but at some point it always lined up. And I was really excited about that surreal moment, but that became less important as it was up for the month. So I was hoping, the billboards could kind of like announce themselves as like this public whisper. I was thinking there's this line of Samuel Beckett's I love, simple things can be powerful antidotes to everyday blindness. So I kind of wanted them these to function as these temporary monuments. And, I was thinking, even though it's a simple gesture that has like metaphoric power, I think it still was important because it's in the public, for it to have real world consequences. So, my billboards colonized, an advertising platform, reduced commercial, ads for a month, and hopefully provoked, some sort of thought about the kind of like the insidious nature of marketing, even if it was just for a month. Or I was thinking like maybe after they come down, I was hoping maybe some people wouldn't really notice if like once it goes back to being the regular thing, you might be like, what was that? But it's also, this is like I wanted to have like a direct reference to Phyllis Gonzalez Torres. I was thinking about the Perfect Lovers piece of his. But I also wanted to I was thinking about veracity and artifice, and you're thinking you're not looking at the landscape. It's still framed. It's still like it's an image. It's a representation of it. So I kind of wanted to kind of be very blatant about it being artifice. And some were really close to downtown. Some kind of, I think it went as far as the airport. And I kind of liked when they were like off. It became like these weird things. I was driving on another highway, and I was like, oh my God, the billboard's off. I was like, whoa, that's cool. And it's kind of hard to see, it's on there. So it was funny that it was the first piece where kind of my hands didn't touch it really. Like, I ended up hiring a photographer because I said I only have one shot, So I hired this photographer, took the photos, and then it really went from his computer to the CBS outdoor and print. It was like a weird thing to not have my hand on it. So I think that's probably why I made a book. And I forgot I was gonna bring you guys books. I'll send them. So it was like the last 3 nights, and I decided I needed some night shots, some of those yummy night shots. And the state trooper, I was at the side of the highway, which is kind of dangerous, but with the art, sometimes you do dangerous things, even though it's dumb, but you're like, but this is my moment, like after it's gone, So the state trooper comes up behind me. He's like, you can't be here, what are you doing? And then I was like, oh, did this piece, and I need to he's like, you did those? He's like, I drive up and down this highway, and he's like, I didn't know if it was like a protest. He's like, I always kept thinking, what is this? Is it art? He's like, but who's agreeing that they do it like guerrilla? Like he was really, so in the end, he's like, I'm gonna stay. How much time do you need? I wanna keep you safe. so he stayed and hung out to make sure I wasn't gonna get hit by a truck. It was kind of great. And it's funny because it's like, of course it was like NPR, it was on the news, it was on stuff. But like my only real gauge of this piece was some guy who was like, I could tell was not an art person, It was kind of like, oh. Okay, I think I have only 2 more projects. No, 1, 2, 3. Bear with me. So I was invited to be part of this exhibition of contemporary Caribbean artists at the Real Art Ways in Hartford. And I decided partly because I was overwhelmed with other shows, I was like, I don't want to do anything in the museum because that doesn't make sense because Hartford is the 4th largest, Caribbean density in North America. So it gave me more time to figure out what to do. But I decided, well, let me try to do something in the community. It's not my Caribbean community. Like I grew up in Crown Heights, which used to be very Caribbean, but I was like, I could still kind of do something there. So I was thinking about my relationship to Trinidad. I was born there, and I left when I was 1, and I spent all my summers growing up there. Lots of family. I grew up in a very Trinidadian household. Like on the weekends, we were doing cleaning and hearing the WLIB radio station, which is, the state. Like I felt like I was really tied to it still. Like I still love roti, I still love soca, I love carnival, all of that. And I felt like I was really still connected. But I started to think about like other signifiers for culture. So I was thinking about like books, and I realized, my education is decidedly American. I think I took 1 Caribbean literature class at Dartmouth, and I was thinking, like when was the last time I read like a Derek Walcott poem, or when was the last time I reread like Crick Crack Monkey, which is like this classic, or like picked up the new Edward Danticat book. So I was thinking, so I really started with myself, I was thinking like, what if I'm feeling this way, I have to imagine that other immigrants are feeling this too. So for me, it's like kind of important to start with myself from this work, you know, and hope that it kind of resonates. And I just kind of trust it's going to resonate with someone, even if it's only one person. And I think so. So that's like an ad for the. So I made a library in the grocery store of exclusively Caribbean titles. And so it's function, and it kind of functions, so it's in the store, ACA Foods Market. And the books I just organized them according to like category and region, so like along the kind of customary products that are sold. So the Jamaican authors were near the jerk sauces. I thought this was great, like the political titles, like Slavery and Social Death was with the hot pepper sauces. Nice, right? Yeah. And it was a trust library, you know, no library card was needed, no specific date of return. You just kind of trusted to kind of return them when you finish digesting them. And my hope was, I guess, to expand what we imagine the consumables of our market to be, particularly one that traffics in nostalgia for home. You know, I was hoping like people could kind of slow down and kind of relish the sights and smells, but also like the imperishable produce, you know, of our West Indian heritage. And like, you know, I was also thinking about these disparate economies happening in the same place, you know, so it's lending and borrowing is happening in the same place as capitalism and monetary exchanges. But I was also thinking about like blind spots or like these underseen or underused spaces and how you can like use them and hopefully kind of reveal something else. And then I just did personal things like this would have no connection to anyone, but for me, you know, December 1st comes and my mom is getting ready to prepare like the Christmas cake. It's called black cake. So she's like has all the candied fruit and you pour all the port and stuff. So it's like soaking for the 3 weeks before Christmas before you make it. So I decided to put all the Trinidadian titles there. I just was funny. Like the small islands were with the beans. I just thought because it's so. I was like, hee. Oh, these are the Guyanese titles were with some of the Guyanese products, children's books with cookies and stuff. In the front, and this was right after the earthquake, they had the Haitian sodas. I put Haitian titles in the front. And I put like cultural books with like, I thought this is our culture. You'll have these like ancient medicinal like tonics from like the beginning of time next to like, oh, you gotta love the Jamaicans. And I have Jamaican family, so I can kind of diss them. Like, like really, a drink called Bedroom Bully? Really? Bedroom Bully? Or Stallion, Black Stallion stuff. I said, but it's all like, it's the range of our culture, you know? So it includes, I had like books on Moko Jumbies and a book on like Bob Marley and stuff. You know, so this is some other, and I was just enjoying like language too, like skin folk, hard dough. You know, I was like, oh my God, that's good. So I ended up like, took all these photographs, I ended up showing these as photographs for some show, and I'm like, oh my God, it becomes like this other thing. But this is, you know, how I wanted it to function, you know, and that's literally what happened. And not all the books came back, you know, some people kept them, you know, and I had to let it go. It's like, it's not the Caribbean neighborhood I grew up in, you know, so however they chose to engage with it. So it was up for a while, I think about a year, and then they couldn't handle the space, so it was kind of a bummer. So then it moved to the community center down the road. But then I was asked to do it again in Toronto, so I did this last year in Toronto, and it was a totally different space. It was like a really crammed like store, and it was great. And I had to update the title, so this was 5 years later. But because I was doing it in Canada, I decided to add more Caribbean, Canadian authors. I had to kind of reach out to people to find out who. There's a bigger. There was more of a focus on Jamaican titles and Trinidadian because that's the bulk of the population. So I kind of wanted to kind of make it specific, and I'm hoping to do it in Florida and Miami, because then I'm going to have like a little Havana, a little Haiti. And I could kind of like have different like branches and stuff. But I kind of like that these kind of were packed in this store. And at one point she said, Karyn, you know, the shop owner, she's like, you know, we love Easter. So I'm going to have to remove your books for the Easter season because we need all the shelf space. That's fine. Then she put them back up. You know, so I think it's still kind of functioning, which is great. So this was in 2011. I was invited to do a project in Mexico City. And I had just spent time, I was on sabbatical. I spent time in Trinidad. And I don't know why I forgot this, but one day I was driving, and, you know, the traffic is horrible at rush hour. I was like, did I see there was like a row of like, I was following, no, my mom was driving, and then I woke up, and there was like a row of like pineapples on the Jersey barrier. And I was like, did I see that? And I was thinking, of course, like, when rush hour, starts and traffic slows down, the fruit market's flourishing. So that all these men and women are selling like fruit in between the highway. So I was thinking when I got to Mexico City, it really I felt like I was home, except I didn't know what people were saying. I don't speak Spanish. But it felt like so similar to Trinidad, and where all of life, all manifestations of life are happening on the street. The beautiful, banal, the excess, the impoverished, all of it's kind of like there, we're kind of all communing in this space and trying to kind of navigate this. In Trinidad, a street, an empty parking lot becomes like a place to have a fete. The street becomes theater. The ground is where you sell your goods. So I kind of like that the same thing happens, or there's a great deal of repurposing. Nothing stays, nothing just has one function. So when I got to Mexico City, I loved that about it, but I didn't see the Jersey barrier. Like, it was still functioning that way. So it's like, well, maybe I could do something with that. So I decided to put it in front of, I got them, it turns out the curator's husband worked for a concrete company that made them, so we were able to get one. And I decided to put it in front of the gallery in a way to kind of, I was thinking first about like those beautiful Spanish cathedrals when you go to the Zocalo, like throughout Mexico, and they have these crazy thresholds. You have to kind of step over like almost 2 feet. And it's kind of like they're put there for you to pay attention, like to recognize that you're entering this, like, you realize you're entering this kind of sacred space. And I was thinking about, the colonizers doing that for you, kind of like to recognize it, and also like this is our Christianity, this is the thing to like understand. So I was thinking about how the old plazas were like kind of destroyed to kind of build these cathedrals, and there's definitely problematics there, but I was thinking about what does it mean to have something that's signifying like how you should approach a space. So I was like, well, maybe I could have this banal thing that's like a divider and now have a new function. So in front, it's at once like acknowledging the gallery, but it's also a barrier to getting inside. But there's also thinking, well, maybe it's also kind of giving a level of reverence to that space, potentially to that space. So every morning I just I would go to the market and put fruit along the thing. And I never saw anyone take it, but at some point, the fruit was gone. Like by midday, it was gone. And I kind of liked that. I didn't say anyone take it, but it was gone. But then I liked that by midday, that's where people started having lunch. It was a space where people were just hanging out. And I think about, I always think about, well, in the last like 2 years, the eternal mutability of objects, and their transformative power, and the kind of that shift to like, and also the same thing, like mutability of spaces, and it made me rethink my coffee table piece, because I started to think it's not really this redundant piece of furniture that's kind of emblematic of a world gone awry or like a defiled life. I just think it's like now it's the coffee table. It's not that it's dead. It's just functioning, in a different. It's transformed into something else. It just has a new way of living. It's not dead. It's just it lives differently. Okay, I promise. Only 2 left. This piece and one more, and then we're done. Okay, I can stop now. No, I might as well finish. Okay. Okay, so I was invited to do this project with Creative Time, which I was super excited about. I mean, the last art project in Central Park was Christo's, and like decades ago, like 25 years ago or something. But it was the task to create a work for Central Park was kind of, I have to say, it was really daunting. A place that's already filled with so much beauty. I was thinking, what can compete with this kind of amazing landscape? So I decided just to focus on the site of Central Park and kind of reveal what existed at the location, perhaps kind of allowing for a reflection of what stands there today. So I decided to, so this is an image of, this is representing like the Wisconsin glacier that like, traveled through New York City 20,000 years ago. And it's kind of created like the valleys and and moved boulders and formed rock outcroppings as the ice sheet was kind of moving and kind of melting. And so all these things were kind of being displaced. So I was thinking about like these things are being like stranded in this new location when the ice sheet melted. And I was interested in like the physical evidence of these things, this kind of geological diaspora, this stuff that's like, you can find it throughout Central Park. It's both everywhere in plain sight, but if you don't know it's there, it's kind of hidden, kind of by the lack of knowledge. So I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about a more recent history of the park. In the 1800s, there was a community of free blacks that formed this community called Seneca Village, and and today there's like really little evidence of this really vibrant, I would say middle class community. Now there's like a plaque, like this, some faculty and students from Columbia and City College did all this research and kind of uncovered like evidence, so you have this Dutch plate by way of China, so if this was here, we kind of know, we could kind of get a sense of the type of people that were living there. So they're pretty much, when they decided to build the park, they were just kind of displaced, like kind of wholesale. It was kind of, they say it's the first case of like, claiming eminent domain, saying that this is kind of wasted land, and that was the way to kind of like displace them so they could build this park for the kind of the rich folks on that part of New York. So I kind of thought of like this literal and kind of maybe metaphoric connection between the kind of this subtle residue of the artifacts that are in the park and of this village. So I figured, let me just find an object that could kind of represent that. And then I thought about my Billboard project again, and I was thinking maybe it seemed appropriate to have like an image of the actual landscapes, And from across the lake, there were two different pathways, and it was kind of, at one point, if you're from across the lake, the backdrop kind of matches it. So if you walked like on the far way, it's kind of like you could kind of see it slowly moving from like the glacier, then it becomes the pottery shard, and then it becomes the landscape. And I like this idea like that it's like mutating to these different things, and like this, and I was thinking about like this domestic object is kind of made from clay that kind of dug from the same earth that the glacier traversed, so it becomes this weird like, whoa, this kind of loop thing happening. So I decided to use like a lenticular process. That didn't make sense to collage. I thought lenticular, that cheesy thing, lenticular, it's like, oh, the lady now has, the boobs are showing, or like Jesus now has a crown with the blood, it's like that novelty kind of thing. So I was like, well, there's got to be a way to use that where it's not cheesy. So I thought this would be perfect as a way of like, in a way, I love that people are, it's like a time, I think the curator, Nato Thompson, was calling it like a time-traveling billboard, and kind of like you can control the time in terms of how you move. You move fast, you're seeing it shifting, or if you move slow, or like when you got really close up, it really kind of, it did this weird thing of like conflating and compressing, the idea of like almost like compressing 20,000 years into one. So there's something to me that I liked about the expansiveness of a glacier, like you could almost not even comprehend it, and contrasting that with the scale of the intimacy of like a ceramic plate. Like I was hoping somehow to equate the two, this massive, larger-than-life thing with this thing that's like the most humble thing, and kind of what does it mean to position these two kind of opposing scales and physicalities in the same image. So it's kind of strange. There's infinite pictures. Like I was like, I can't. It was kind of amazing. It was like so beautiful. It was so beautiful, But it was important to have like the didactic next to it, because they wrote the text, and they didn't mention like no. Seneca Village folks were like kicked out, displaced. They're kind of like, oh, this is the former site of. And I was like, no. Can we rewrite this? Because you can kind of think this is just beautiful, and like, oh, different things from the space. It's like, no. There's politics here. Please, like, I like to be subtle with it, but you can't erase. Don't censor. So in the end, they did. They changed it, and then they added a part, because this is true. It's one of the few areas in New York where some German immigrants started moving in, some Irish, and it was one of the few areas at that time where people were kind of living in harmony. Of course, there was racism, but people were kind of living in harmony, So the pig farmers, it was all working. Okay, this piece is called Clothes, is my last series, Clothes and Concrete Block, and I'm trying to make a direct reference to, like in developing countries, at least in Trinidad and I know in the Caribbean, you'll buy kind of building materials as you have the funds, and and then in the interim they have another purpose, so here like it's functioning as a clothes drying rack, but I also, something about this photograph I like it's like almost like this balancing act. It's like almost like echoing the tensions of like a developing country's role in kind of like this globalized world. So I took this photograph, and I kept wanting to make a three-dimensional, like a portrait of it, a three-dimensional version of it. And again, I'm going to show you these images, but you have to be in the space. It doesn't really work. So I made this piece called Cinder Block, and it's strange because when you go in the gallery, it kind of looks like you're seeing through it. And so people just look at that, and it just looks like it's cinder blocks. And at some point, you realize they're mirrors. It's outfitted with mirrors, custom size, which I didn't realize what a pain in the ass it is, because they're not the same. I mean, I have like 40 different templates I had to use for this. So all of a sudden, this like solid cinder block wall with like these predetermined like dimensions. I think it was 5 feet by 9. I didn't want you to see your face in it. I wanted to have that fragmentation thing happen. Like all of a sudden, it's like changing the perception. It's extending this space. All of a sudden, this thing that seems solid and penetrable, all of a sudden, it's like collapsing or expanding, or at once it's filling the space, but it also is like dissipating. So I like that thing of like it's not. It makes me think of like the Berlin Wall. We thought that was gonna be there forever, and then you see that famous image of like the guard standing there. It's like in a second, it's like it's gone. So I did this show last year, and it was weird to do a piece with like objects, but I've been spending time collecting materials from like, I was thinking about Trinidad and using things from Trinidad, but in the summers, I spend part of my summers in this island off the coast of Maine called Matinicus, and I was realizing like I'm really drawn to these two places where like Trinidad is home, but I definitely feel like an outsider at times, and I'm Martiniquez Island. Like there's no black people, there's no brown people, there's nothing. It's like 40 families live on this little fisherman island. And I was thinking like I have a real visceral connection to these two places, even though at times they each feel foreign, but also strangely familiar. And I was thinking about, Trinidad as being like the most southern, island in the Caribbean Sea, and Martiniquez is the most eastern part of America. Like it's the most furthest part that's still considered this country. So I was thinking about how those two places are so different, but there's something very similar. So I kind of decided to try to make work. So I brought back this piece of driftwood, and I didn't know what to do with this. I thought I was going to add all these beautiful pieces of wood were coming out of it, and it was really beautiful, and I realized it was too much. Like it was enough to just have the evidence that I kind of worked and I was studying it, and I decided just to kind of put it on, make a steel piece. But then I kind of like with the cinder block wall, from where you are, depending where you are, there's like reflections in that background. I actually tried to bring that thing home, and when I went back to get it after the winter, it was gone, so I ended up bringing back a different version of it, and I'm trying to figure out what to do in my studio with that. So here's another shot of it. And that's a partial shot of the installation. I thought there was an interesting thing to have, like that, something about that cemetery wall and how that kind of permeates, but it's also kind of down. I was thinking about the relationship with that, with those actual cinder blocks there. I was trying to like make this kind of loose but kind of direct relationship between these two places. And I think I'm going to end there. Yeah. Cool. Good.
It seems like you in your earlier work you were very hands-on and like into like the making, and then you had a portion where you were on these installations. Are you working with others to?
No, I'm making them. Yeah. I mean, I was renting out times. I promised this gallery I was going to have this piece, and then my gallery in Mexico City wanted to take it down to an art fair in Texas, and it sold. So literally, I had like a couple weeks to make. So I actually had a glass student help me with cutting the mirror. I was like, I need. It was just an efficient thing for time. Like, you cut those mirrors. I'm in setting. It was like a factory to get it done. Yeah, it's nice to have that. I think about like my background is, I made pots. I mean, the most haptic, you know what I mean? So what happened that, the projects became, and it made sense to me, like the transition from that to like, a room, that's a container too, you know what I mean? But then it's like, what happened there is, with the public, certain projects, when they're in the, like permanent public art projects, there's a thing where you have to get engineers involved, so you end up like, but it's kind of weird when you have like your hand is gone when it used to be all about the touch, and I'm talking about intimacy and stuff, but, so I'm hoping to make more, I like both, like I'm working on 2 big public art projects right now, but at the same time I'm trying to have this idea, I'm working on masks and making some masks and stuff, so I'm hoping, because it's weird, it's like pots, I used to pinch, I used to throw, what? What's up with that? Yeah.
So earlier you said something about a public listener, which really stood out to me, so I was wondering if you could elaborate.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, how do you have, like, I like making public work, but it's that thing where I don't want the, how do I make work where it has potential duration. You know what I mean? You know, like it can't be consumed in one moment, you know, or like it's gonna. So I did with those billboards. I think if you're rushing in the morning, or like if you're seeing traffic, you may be distracted, or like checking your mail, you might not see it, but then, or like if you're driving midday, you might not notice it because you could whiz 80 miles an hour, but then at night, maybe you know. So I like the idea, like, so when I think of the whisper, it's like, how can you have a work that it's almost not seen, but then when it's seen, it's felt, you know? Like, it's about a speed for me. That's why I was kind of worried about the monument, because it's like, oh, I don't want it to function just like a monument, you know? So it's like, well, if it was not in the playground, it would become a problem, because I like the idea someone might think it's functioning. Like, these kids are like, we can use it, right? And I like that they're like, assumed it wasn't art first, you know? You know, I was up for this MTA commission, and I spent so much time in Bushwick trying to figure out, it's like a really poor neighborhood in New York. And I was thinking, okay, these folks are on these overhead train platforms, which are horrible, like in the winter. So I was like, I don't care about making something. I want to make something. I don't want to make something pretty. I could make something pretty, but I want to make something that every day they're on the train going to the city to a job they might not care about. So I had a proposal where I was going to have like a map, like out of steel, like in relief of the site that they're seeing, kind of like the Inbound Houston piece, where this is like the streets. But within that, I made these kaleidoscopes that were simple, like just the 3 triangles, so that when it's raining, you're seeing their landscape, which it's the most density of projects in anywhere, I think, in the country. So this place that feels ugly, all of a sudden you're looking at this kaleidoscope, you're just standing there waiting for the train, and all of a sudden you're seeing cars, and they're kind of making this beautiful dance. So I was thinking about that piece would have been the perfect public like the whisper, because it's like it's just reflecting where you live, but just allowing you to maybe see it different, and every day it's going to be different. But in the end, they went with like a metallic, like a metal drawing of like birds, you know. And it's like, really, people? But to me, that piece is like it announces itself as a public art piece, but you could take it all in, you know. But how do you trust that your audience doesn't need it all at once, or they can't take, it's too much all at once? It's like maybe if it's quiet enough, it could kind of enter when you need it, you know? Yeah.
How does that translate to the gallery market?
Damn. I didn't show some objects that I think were quiet. Like I did this piece where do I have the image of it? I thought this worked. Let's go here again. This is what it looked like in my studio. Oh, this piece. Like I did a residency in Kansas. Salina, Kansas. Go there. It was kind of great. Oh, man. So I passed by this non-functioning like mill, and they had this sign that this object, it said danger. It was supposed to be like a thing, you can't go past it, but it was all whack, like the and then like the danger was so sad. It was like it was the saddest thing. So I was like, oh my God, I have to take this back home. So I cut it. I had to cut it because it was I couldn't make a crate that big. I could, but it was too stupid. It was too expensive. So then when I put it back together, and then I decided to take away the paint, and it's only faint, you can't see it here, but in person you'll see a little bit of the yellow on the sign, and the piece is called Danger Sign, and I decided, okay, I love this thing, it's making me think of, you know, those modernist, you know, sculptor dudes, Joel Shapiro, you know what I mean, like all that yummy stuff. I was like, but Karyn, you can't just get caught up in that stuff. So I was like, okay, don't forget it had a function. So like, how can you kind of give it back its function? So I just made, and every time I install this, it has to be different feet because all floors are not level. So I just added these little yellow feet, you know, to make it balanced. So to me, this is like a quiet piece that no one will buy. Then, you know what I mean? But it's this thing like, oh, it's a sign. And then it's like, oh, it's kind of like this modern sculpture. Then it's like, well, what's up with that thing? And then like, oh, I'm actually making this thing stand again, you know? So kind of give it back some of its humanity, some of its like, you know, power or something again. It's hard, the gallery thing, you know? I'm amazed I have like 2 galleries and they haven't sold anything. I've had 2 shows with one. I'm going to have another one in Mexico City. I'm like, okay, but you know, but you're probably not going to sell anything. The photographs, she loves the photographs, but she can't sell those photos. But who cares? Like, that's where you learn how to write so you can get grants. Right?
For you, and you're like,
I mean, it's a new thing. I mean, it's the last, I mean, for a while, all of a sudden I said to myself, I'm sick of doing these, having these big projects that take years. Like the Creative Capital one took 5 years to make that Billboard project, you know. These two public art things I'm working on now have been in the works, you know. So I love the idea about a gallery. All of a sudden I was like, I want a gallery, you know, because then it would force me to kind of make work that's smaller, quicker. You know, I don't have to, almost like, who cares? I can make like bad work. Like I don't know why. I feel like it's okay if the work is, you know, I want to make good work, but you know what I mean? I feel like it's a different sort of risk taking, or I'm more, on some of them, I'm more invested in the public stuff where I'm anonymous or where people don't think it's art, you know? But I love, like I got obsessed with you and Hunter's piece. Where's Hunter? Is he here? Did he skip out? Whatever. I was obsessed. Someone said, Jack said, he's like, oh my God, you're obsessed. I was like, this is the opposite of my work. But I was like, I love work that's like, oh, like yummy and color and, you know. So I'm thinking, so now I have this idea for masks. And I was like, this is good. And then I'm thinking about Trinidad. Like I have all these like images, or I go to Trinidad and I help like make carnival costumes. And it's like color and stuff. But in my work, it gets like, you know. Yeah, the gallery. I don't know. I'll see what happens. I have this show next fall, and I have no idea. Like, not one idea. Like, I make 3 works a year. Like, and I haven't made anything this year. Oh my God, I'm lying. Did I make anything this year? I know, but they're horrible. Did I make anything this year?
dude, it's almost November.
Oh my God. I don't know if I made any art this year. Did I not make art? Because it doesn't count, because the public art piece, I already had the idea from the year before, and yes, it's up now, but whoa, it's November. I'm gonna be busy. I'm gonna make art. Damn it. Wow. Okay. Didn't go away. Okay.
We have another lecture on Wednesday. It's Colleen Smith.
Colleen Smith is coming? Oh, she's amazing. Oh, don't miss that one. She is good. She is good.